So is everyone here familiar with the Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers?
Yes, I am. I even have a copy of it.
Really?
I used to, at the last synagogue I belonged to, we had a Torah study, which we did every Sunday. And after we got finished with the Torah, we said, instead of starting again, let's do something a little bit different. So we did Pirkei Avos for a while.
So Pirkei Avos, just the overview, the historical, where does this book? This is a book written about the year 180 with the rest of the Mishnah. Mishnah is a compilation of 63 different books written on everything Jewish. It comprises all of the Torah, everything. It's like it's the oral Torah, and the oral Torah was written down. That was written down initially as the Mishnah. A few hundred years later, it was expanded upon in the Gemara or the Talmud. But the Mishnah is comprised of 63 books, separated into 6 different sections, and one of the books is called Pirkei Avos, or chapters or ethics of the fathers. And this is a book dedicated solely towards the study, the pursuit of ethical perfection. It's a book that talks solely about Musar. So I thought that maybe we could try to attempt to have a textual or source-based discussion of Musar and using the ethics of the fathers as a guidebook. Now, particularly relevant is the idea of the time period that we're in right now, between Pesach and Shavuot. The Pesach is Passover, the holiday we just celebrated, and the upcoming Jewish holiday of receiving the Torah. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. There's been an ancient Jewish tradition. I've seen even listed in this book. This book was written 500 years ago. An ancient Jewish tradition of studying Pirkei Avos, or chapters of the fathers, specifically in this time. So I said, hey, it's a Musar book, it's a Musar class, and we're talking about ethics. Let's and now's the time where people traditionally study this work. Why don't we do it? A little bit. Try to see, dip our toe in the water and see if we could grow, in our Musar, in our learning, in our studying, using the book, The Ethics of the Fathers. Good. Okay, so now just quickly about the structure of the book. It's it's very different than every other book, Jewish books or non-Jewish books, in the way it's structured. It starts off with a delineation of the path of tradition of how the Jewish tradition has been passed on from generation to generation, which is interesting. We'll talk about that. What's the relevance of that? And it takes scholars, leaders, great Jewish thinkers from a 500-year period, and says, what were their Musar lessons? What was there was this great rabbi. His name was Shimon the Righteous, right? He's the first one, or he's the second one, really, and he lived 300 years before the Common Era, and he would say, etc., etc. This was his Musar, ethical, idea that he particularly espoused to. So there's going to be about 60 different sages that are all going to be represented in this book, in Ethics of the Fathers. There's 6 chapters. There's about between 15 and 25 different snippets in each one of those chapters. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little piece of it, and we're going to try to analyze it, and we're going to ask questions. And now it's just us 3. So Ed, I expect questions from you. Jerry, I expect from we're going to say, okay, fine, what does this mean? And try to dig deeper and deeper and deeper and see how deep we can get. See what different ideas. And we're going to take every word and weigh it and say, does this make sense? What are the problems with it? Are there any questions? Et cetera, until maybe we'll see if we come up with some unbelievable ideas to help us become better people and to help us grow. So that's what I would what I'm interested in doing today. How say you?
Good.
Sounds good?
Sounds good.
If I'd known, I would have brought my copy of Pirkei Avos with me.
Okay, so I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction. Why specifically was this tradition accepted amongst the Jewish people to study this book, dedicated solely towards ethical perfection. Why specifically at the time period between Pesach, between Passover and Shavuot? It's a very curious time. It's like these 50 days, 7 weeks where we count the Sfirat HaOmer. It's the beginning of spring. It's the beginning of the Jewish liberation towards the Jewish acceptance of the Torah at Sinai. 50 days building up. Every day we're building a step further towards the ultimate goal of getting the Torah. Why specifically during these times are we so focused on ethical perfection that we, as a national entity, as a national group, we accept upon ourselves the responsibility of focusing on ethical development? What do you say, Jerry?
Yeah, I didn't understand that far back. What was the problem with the society they lived in that they needed that?
You saying what was wrong? Maybe the societies were just fine, and why they need ethical perfection?
Yeah.
Well, the answer to that is that every human being is flawed. Mm-hmm. By definition, if you're human, you have flaws. If you don't have any flaws, you're not a human. You're an angel, right? You're perfect. No one's perfect, and that's what we hear. That's the Weltanschauung. That's the worldview that the Jewish people and our Torah teachings have broadcast to the whole world, is that we're here with a purpose. We're here with a mission. We're here to perfect ourselves, perfect our communities, and perfect mankind. The whole idea of Tikkun Olam, I'm sure you've heard of. That. Well, what does that mean? Fixing the world. Why? Because that is, for the past 3 millennia, that's what the Jewish people have been telling humanity. We're here to fix ourselves, and we're here to fix the entire, and the whole Jewish idea, the Jewish national responsibility is to perfect mankind. So yes, people were in need of ethical perfection, and even 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, and 2,000 years ago.
Always searching.
We think that decadence and immorality is modern, and the degradation of belief systems and moral, right? So we think it's a new thing. Hey, the 50s, everyone got married when they were 25, and they stayed married till right? Mm-hmm. That and in a large way that is true. Mm-hmm. But if you look, and now it's an interesting thing, if you take a look at many of the response literature, Jewish literature is 18th century Jewish literature, like Torah-based literature, amazing amount of voluminous literature written on every aspect of Torah life and practice. And part of the things they talk about is responsa, questions and answers. And I was reading this week a question about the most immoral, like just shockingly immoral stories that were happening in some little shtetl, some little village in the middle of Europe, and there was like a whole litany of adulterous episodes that happened in this one little town. And I was thinking, this is the 1700s. This is a time where everyone was pious.
Taking place in the Ukraine,
right? This is everyone's pious, and all's well. We haven't yet been exposed to greater society. The Jewish people were living, and people for all eternity have been flawed from day one. Adam was flawed. His children were flawed. And that's the story of mankind. And, we're here because we're Jewish because we say, yes, you don't have to stay flawed. And you talk to Christians and they say, man is flawed and there's nothing he can do about it. Nothing. This is a major disagreement that the Jews have with the Christians. They say man is flawed and there's nothing he can do about it.
Original sin.
And there's nothing you can, and we say that's not true. And we have evidence that we're right, because you meet people that actually work on their character, and they are not flawed, or they're much less flawed than other people. So we have the data, to back that we're right. It is possible for you to change yourself, but the reality of mankind, having shortcomings and ethical shortcomings, has been around. It's been very, very, very popular for a very long time. Think about the Romans. This book was written. I had this copy, the Hebrew copy of the book, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers. This book was written under Roman persecution. How ethical were the Romans? Terrible, unimaginably unethical, at least by today's standards. Petty criminals. You're shoplifting a belt from J.C. Penney. They put you next day into the Colosseum to be ripped apart by a lion or by some other criminal. Mm-hmm. Crazy. 10,000 people in one of these in one day they've had slaughtered in these Colosseums. 10,000 people with perfume being sprayed everywhere so people wouldn't gag from all that blood. Seriously. And this is a highly developed, highly sophisticated.
It was their circus.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is a time where immorality was just reigning. So yes, and as Jews, we're no different. We also have problems. But we have the imperative of trying to rectify those problems. So yes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one Mishnah, the first Mishnah, and we're going to rip it to shreds. I'm going to say, this is the question, this is the question, this makes sense, this makes sense, and we're trying to make sense. Because every word is really a lesson. And every word is telling you something. Why did it say this and not say that? There's a lot of wisdom, a lot of ideas that fill every single word, every single sentence of this work. Now, just quickly, an idea that I wanted to share here is that I think one of the reasons why we specifically take this time before accepting the Torah every year in Shavuot, in the holiday of Shavuot, we focus on ethical perfection. I think there's a deep lesson behind that.
Yes, yeah. I never answered the question.
You have an answer? What's your answer?
No, I was saying is because it was between the time, it focused on the time between they left Egypt, and when they received the Torah at Mount Sinai.
Okay.
And they were questioning Moses at every turn during the whole thing. When Moses was up in Mount Sinai, they rebelled. They built the golden calf.
You're saying that they needed.
They were not ethical at all between the time they left Egypt and the time they received the Torah.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point, and that is that's pertinent to what he brought up, what Jerry brought up. But I think that we can make it much more practical for ourselves. Means yes, there's a historical reality behind the fact that the Jews at this specific point in history were very immoral, or needed some ethical, fixing, perfection. But on top of that, for us living in 2013, we're also want to experience accepting the Torah. And what you need to know, the prerequisite that you have to have before you're able to accept the philosophical, theological, intellectual ideas of the Torah, you have to make sure that you are a vessel that's worthy of holding the Torah. Just like the Torah, when you put the Torah, you always put it in the sanctuary. You put it in a respectable place. You make it nice and make it beautiful. So too, if we want to bring the Torah into our hearts, if we want to really inculcate these ideas into ourselves, we have to make sure that we're a vessel, we're a receptacle that the Torah will feel comfortable in. If you're someone who needs ethical fixing, or you have serious ethical shortcomings, you are not worthy of being a vessel that's holding the Torah. When we're preparing to accept the Torah, we have to make sure what we're doing is we're building the sanctuary, we're building the Arona Kodesh, the ark, so to speak, that holds the Torah. So I think it takes this idea and says, ethical perfection. Why are we doing that? So we want to become better people. Why? There's the idea of becoming a better person, but additionally, there's also the factor of if you want to accept theological, philosophical ideas, you can't do that if you're someone who has severe ethical shortcomings. Nice idea, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Chapters of the Fathers. Why is it called Chapters of the Fathers? That's the first question I was expecting everyone to ask me.
Why is it called Chapters of the Fathers?
Yeah.
I would say, or ethics. It's either ethics or chapters. Why would we call ethics of the fathers, not ethics of, of the Torah, or ethics of the sages? Or why fathers? Pray tell. Why is this book called Ethics of the Fathers? It should say Jewish ethics, or Torah ethics, or moral ethics, or ethical ethics.
My question would be, who are the fathers? Is it Moses and the other prophets?
Or is it the authors, of the work, or is it the forefathers? That's another question. I don't know which fathers we're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
Who actually scribed all the Mishnah? The Mishnah.
yes, that's Rabbi Judah the Prince. If you heard that name, he was he was a rabbi who lived at the end of the 2nd century of the Common Era, and he was one who redacted the entire Mishnah. He collected 1,000 rabbis, and they assembled all of the wisdom, all of the accrued knowledge of the Jewish people, and redacted it and codified it over many, many years in a way that could be transmitted for posterity.
Mm-hmm. Hey, your brother last night was saying the whole Mishnah was written in code and you can't really understand it, which is why they had to go write the Talmud to explain it.
Yeah, they wanted to write as little as possible. They want to write as terse as possible.
Really?
Yeah, because there is a Torahitic prohibition against writing down the oral Torah. So you're not allowed to do it, but they had to do it because otherwise the Torah would have been forgotten. Because Roman persecution, Roman restrictions on learning, Roman disbanding of central Jewish authority, Roman exile, dispersion. The Jews aren't unified in one location. If they're not unified, if they're not one group, it's very easy to forget the Torah. It's very easy if you live in a community that doesn't have a temple, or some sort of Jewish institution. It's very easy to assimilate. Mm-hmm. Right? So what they concocted is a way to have like a portable homeland, which is a intellectual homeland, to take the Torah, and people shouldn't forget it by making it available in print. And they did that by writing down the Mishnah.
Okay.
And this book of Ethics of the Fathers is the ethical aspect, part of the ethical aspects of the Jewish ideas that were written down at that point in time. Okay, so let's pace ourselves. There were 63, yes. 63 in 6 different sections, and incidentally, the names of the sections are agriculture, Zraim, and all the laws of agriculture, all the laws of planting in the land of Israel. There's lots of laws that talk about it. Agricultural laws, time-based laws. What's the next section? Like, what do you do in Pesach? How do you shake a lulav? Right? What happens in Yom Kippur? Right? Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat. All things which are part of the calendar, or part of the week, are in that section. So Megillah, right, on Purim, that has its own section, its own book. One of the 63 is called Megillah. One of them is called Rosh Hashanah. One of them is called Yom Kippur. One of them is called Sukkot. One of them is called Pesach. Right, different times of the year, and they have different books which tell you everything you know about that portion. Then you have the laws of damages. My ox kills your ox, right? I find all dealing with interpersonal contracts, the laws of contracts, the laws of buying and selling property, the laws of very well organized, highly detailed. It's very sophisticated. You find something. I give something to Ed to watch. I give him my iPod and he watches it and it breaks. 4 different kinds of people that watch. Did I pay him or not? Was he borrowing it? Was he using it or not? Was he watching it for me? Highly sophisticated, and detailed and very, very specific laws regards to damages. Laws of marriage, divorce, marriage responsibilities, levirate marriages, laws of an adulterous woman, right? That's the fourth section. Fifth section is laws of kachim, of korbanot, of sacrifices in the temple. And lastly is the sixth order of the Mishnah, the sixth section, is the laws of tarot, the laws of purity and impurity. So these are 6 different sections. Each section has a bunch of different books out of the 63 books that comprise the Mishnah. Highly organized, highly sophisticated. Now, which one of these 6?
You said one section dealt with sacrifices in the temple, but this was written 200 years after the destruction of the temple.
Very good. Well, so that's a very good point that you brought up, but it's still part of the Torah. And when we read Leviticus, it's still part of Leviticus. We're up to Leviticus now. All it's talking about are things that are not pertinent to us anymore. We don't take it when you were the Torah out there, right? Last week, you didn't cut out the sections that weren't pertinent to us right now. How many mitzvahs in the Torah?
613.
How many of them are pertinent to us today in America?
Not a lot of them.
Only like 110 of them, right?
Or even 2,000 years ago, they weren't all pertinent because some are only for men, some are only for women.
Very good, but it's still part of the Torah, and it's still, and we say yes, the temple will be rebuilt, and the Jews will come back to Israel. And as crazy as it sounds now to build a Jewish temple on top of Mount, Temple Mount, as crazy as that seems now, it was a lot crazier 150 years ago to say the Jews are going to reestablish a state in Israel.
Yeah.
Right? We say it, and yes, there will be their sacrifices reinstituted in the temple when it's rebuilt. We're halfway there. We already have Israel. We're within a stone's throw of the Temple Mount. So yes, even though they're not pertinent now, and they weren't pertinent 200 years ago, but they were still part of the Torah that we still learned and we still focus on it. And even today, there's not so many people who know those, who study those things in depth, because they're not so pertinent. But we still give it lots of value, at least intellectual, philosophical value. Now, let me ask y'all: if you had to guess, the book called Ethics of the Fathers is one of the Mishnahs, one of the 63 books of the Mishnah. Now, these 63 books were broken into 6 different sections, 6 different orders: agricultural, time-based, damages, marriage and divorce, sacrifices, and purity and impurity. Which one of these 6 sections should the book Ethics of the Fathers be placed into?
The law? I don't know.
Huh? You following the question?
Does it necessarily fall into just one of them, or can it overlap?
Yeah.
No, it's these 63 books were broken up into 6 different broader categories.
Okay.
So time-based.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's certainly not time-based. We agree on that? Because it's at all times. It's not bound to time. Right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, every day of the week you have to have ethical perfection. You wouldn't say that it's time-based. It's not time-bound. Which one of these 6 sections should the book relating to ethics be placed into?
Something to do with the law, the books of law?
Yeah, but they're all law. But which section of law?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
It's not. Is it agricultural?
Well, I mean, it could be agriculture, because under agriculture you have tithing, you have.
Okay, so maybe agricultural. We said it's for sure not time bound, right? What about damages?
It could be.
It could be
damage.
damages.
Because there's ethics involved.
Okay, marriage and divorce.
Certainly ethics involved in that.
Okay, so it's one of those 3. Sacrifices?
I don't think so. Maybe.
Well, maybe it's like the sacrifice. Okay, maybe.
Himself.
Purity and impurity?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So now, so what's the reality? The reality is that the book of ethics is in the section dealing with damages. And every single commentator and every single person who discusses this tractate, this section, this book says, why, pray tell, is the book relating to ethics placed in the section?
Ethics of the Fathers.
Yeah. Why is it placed in the section of damages, along with my ox stealing your ox and you losing your iPod in my house? The laws of property, buying and selling property, and the laws of jurisprudence, and how does the court of law give the different kinds of capital punishment, and how do we enforce the law, and
Laws of debt and loans.
yeah, debt and loans, all those things, ethics. So it's an interesting thing. So in this book, authored by the Maharal, it was a 16th century a rabbi who lived in Prague, which was right now in Czechoslovakia. He says the book of damages makes sense, right? I steal from you, I have to pay it back to you, right? I break your thing. It's all logical. Everyone understands it. Ethics are logical as well. These are things that all make sense. These are requirements that make sense, that you jive with it. You know, when you hear that you have to be humble, you have to, be appreciative, you have to be responsible. Those are things that make sense. Those are things that are logical, no less than damages. What I was thinking is that maybe the reason why the Book of Ethics was placed in the section dealing with damages is because every time there's damages, the whole book it's all dealing with conflict, right? I want to, or two parties coming together. I want to buy your field. How do I do that? How do I purchase things? Loss, debt, damages, right? All those things there's always a conflict or there's a convergence of two different forces. I want to buy it from you and you want to sell it to me. There's always a conflict. There's always two different parties. I think that when we are challenged with ethical dilemmas, we're challenged in our lives with difficulties that we have personality-wise and dealing with the challenges of life, there's always a conflict. There's always, what do I do? Do I do what's right or I do what feels better? Do I do what's right or I do what's easier? Do I do what's right or do I do what's, the thing that will make me forget about the challenges?
They're not always mutually exclusive.
Not necessarily, but there's always going to be a conflict. We're always going to be placed in situations where we have two things to do, and we're going to have to make decisions. And every day we're making hundreds of decisions. And I think maybe the subliminal message here is that when you make decisions, it's because you have opposing forces within you. You have your body and your soul. You have your Yetzer Tov and your Yetzer Ra. You have your good and evil inclinations. And we have these struggles, these internal dilemmas all the time. Just like in damages, just like in areas of monetary disputes, there's two sides. There's always going to be two sides in areas of ethical difficulties. And it's something to keep in mind. Is that, for the broader discussion relating to Musar, there's always going to be two sides to the story. I wake up in the morning. My body says go back to sleep, and my neshama, my soul says wake up and let's tackle the day. Right? That's a classic example. Or I already had a bag of potato chips.
Should I have another one?
And I kind of want to have another one, or I kind of want to see the bottom of the bag. Mm-hmm. All right, but I know it's not healthy and it's engorging and it's too much. Right? Another example, and there's countless of these, and we go through them every day. Conflicts, convergence of different forces. Okay, so let's take a look at the first Mishnah. Now I have the English copy, and I will read it first, and then I want to try to critically analyze this Mishnah. So I have it here in English and in Hebrew. Anyone here reads and understands Hebrew well?
You do.
I know. So we'll just read it in English.
I would attempt it if it had vowels.
Yeah, same thing. It's been too many years. I grew up in where I could, as a child, but not without vowels. I can't read it. Too hard.
Yeah, so this is
Moshe.
Yeah, this is a very, very good translation. How do I know? Because I know the guy who translated it.
Moshe Kabal, Torah.
Is it you or your brother?
Ma'uni. Nah, I can't.
Yeah. So we'll just read the English.
Okay.
What does it say? Moses received the Torah from Sinai and transmitted to Joshua. Joshua was Moses' disciple. We know that. Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. Okay, so we have a preamble here. And the preamble says, hey, the Torah, where does it come from? Well, Moses gave it to us from Sinai. And then Moses transmitted it to Joshua. And Joshua transmitted it to the prophits. And
It's all done verbally.
Well,
So far.
it doesn't say.
Doesn't say
either way. So that's a good question. What does Torah mean? Is it oral Torah? Is it written Torah?
Yeah.
Good question. That's question number one. Is it oral? What does Torah mean? Right. Okay. Good question. So Moses gets the Torah from Sinai. He gives it to Joshua. Joshua transmits it to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. They said, who's they?
The elders?
Well, who do you think it is? Moses got the Torah from Sinai. He gave it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. They said, who's they?
The prophets, I would think.
You think it's the prophets?
Or the elders. Or everybody, or all of the above.
So they all said?
They said three things. It can't be Moses.
Because it can be Joshua.
Moses and Joshua could be part of all of the above.
The men of the great assembly. I'd say the great assembly.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
And if you actually read the next Mishnah, it becomes clear that that's correct. So we have very, very quickly, we're told there's 1,000 years of Torah transmission. From Moses to the men of the great assembly. Boom, like that.
1,000 years, huh?
1,000 years. Moses gets the Torah from Sinai. He gives it to Joshua. Joshua gives it to the prophets. What does prophets mean? Prophets encompasses Joshua the elders. Elders lived in the time of Moses as well. Elders to the prophets. Prophets incorporates a time of 900 years.
Yeah, from Joshua all the way down.
From Joshua all the way down to Ezra. Right? All the way down to Ezra. So, and I have an outline here.
Is the Great Assembly the Sanhedrin?
It was sort of a precursor. So it's not really a precursor. Very similar. It was 120 men, not 70 men. But it's a very similar thing. Where it was sort of like the council, the Knesset in Israel. The Knesset, right? What's it called? It's called a Knesset.
Yeah, it's Knesset.
What does Knesset mean?
It's a legislature.
Okay. The Hebrew word for men of the great assembly is Knesset. Assembly means Knesset. And the reason why there's 120 members of the Knesset right now in Israel is because there were 120 members of the Knesset 2,400 years ago, men of the great assembly. It was modeled after that. The Hebrew word for men of the great assembly is Anshe Knesset. Men is Anshe. Knesset, Hagdolah, the great assembly.
Oh, yeah. I see it right there.
You see? Anshe Knesset Hagdolah.
Abdullah,
Okay, so, and they said three things. What they say? Thing number one, be deliberate in judgment. Thing number two, develop many disciples. And thing number three is make offense for the Torah. Make offense for the Torah. So, I think we could break down this Mishnah into really contain two parts. We have part number one is the preamble, which is the delineation of the transmission of the Torah. Right? Moses got the Torah from Sinai. He gave it to Joshua. Joshua gave it to the elders. Elders gave it to the prophets. Prophets gave it to the men of the great assembly. Introduction. Who are these people and how do they fit in the transmission of the Torah? And they told us lessons. And in fact, they told us three lessons. What are these three lessons? Number one, be deliberate in judgment. Number 2, develop many disciples. And number 3, make offense to the Torah. But these are two separate sections of this particular Mishnah. Correct? Would you agree with that, Ed?
Yeah.
It makes sense, right? There's the introduction. What are the questions here?
Well, one thing is that question, make offense for the question. Are you talking about,
Make offense to the Torah?
Kodesh? I mean, are they talking about a beamer? I mean, are they talking about
No, make offense for the Torah means
to segregate it?
It means that if you're going to, it's not that difficult to break a commandment. So you've got to actually go beyond what it actually says, and
I guess
so you have less chance of breaking that commandment. You've got to kind of spread it out so you're not.
Yeah. So what it means to make offense to the Torah,
not literally offense,
not literally offense, but figuratively, just like if you have small children who like to take paper clips and stick them into the electric outlet, right? What do? You
secure it.
You make a fence. You make a fence. That means fence means you can't get past it.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want you to be here. I'll make a fence over here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what rabbinic edicts are. When the rabbis say, "Hey, if someone carries a pen in his pocket on Shabbat, right? They may very well come to write on Shabbat, and writing on the Shabbat is one of the 39 categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbat." Correct? So they said, hey, we're going to make a fence around the Torah, around the Shabbat observance, and say, not only you're not allowed to write, you're not allowed to carry a pen with you as well. That's what a fence means. That's a classic example of a fence. People would riding horses on Shabbat is also a rabbinic prohibition. Why? Because they said it's possible if someone rides around a horse on Shabbat, they may pass a tree and pluck off one of the branches or one of the leaves on Shabbat, which is again one of the 39 categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbat. And therefore they said not only should you not pluck a branch off the tree, right, you shouldn't ride a horse on Shabbat either. Mm-hmm. Right? Another example: if someone is reading from the light. Now remember, primitive lights weren't like these kind of lights, either on or off. They were
fire,
or candles, and or sometimes oil and wick, and sometimes you can adjust the wick or tip the if there's only a little bit left in your glass cup that holds the oil. You might, and the light gets pretty weak. If you ever watch candles, when they burn out, they get very weak. So the rabbi said, hey, if someone's reading from light a candle, they may come to tip the candle and thereby increasing the fire. And increasing the fire is one of the 39 categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbat. So they said you're not allowed to watch, you're not allowed to read from the candlelight if no one else is with you, because you may come to tip it. Those are examples of making offense for the Torah. But specifically regarding the first sentence, the first statement, Moses received the Torah from Sinai, and he gave it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. So Jay already asked, what are we talking about? What Torah? Mm-hmm. That's mm-hmm. one question. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but also additionally, or more generally, how many books are there in the Mishnah? All the Mishnah? 63 books. And how many books does it tell us, hey, this is the Torah. The Torah was given to us from Sinai, to Moses to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the great assembly. How? Not in any one of the other 62 books. Why? Pray tell. Why? Specifically in the book that deals with ethics, is it so important to tell you that this is Torah, and Torah's been around for a long time. Moses got it from Sinai. He gave it to Joshua. Joshua gave it to the elders to the prophets men of the great assembly. Why specifically here is it so important to tell us the transmission of the Torah?
Because it originated with God.
Yeah, but the laws of damages also originate with God. And maybe it should say, hey, when we talk about the laws of marriage and how you get married, so the beginning of the book that talks about marriage says, hey, there's 3 ways to get married, right? And obviously we know, we're familiar with the presentation of the ring, right? Presentation of the ring, it's been around for thousands of years, right? And it was a Jewish idea that was hijacked by everyone else, right? Because that's one of the ways with which marriage happens, right? You just say, hey, wait a minute. Before I tell you anything about marriage, I want to tell you that Moses got the Torah from Sinai, all right? He gave it to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the assembly. Oh, and how do you get married is one of three ways. Either presentation to read, etc., right? Through a document, through, whatever. How come here in this book is it so important to tell us before we get started with the book? Moses got the Torah from Sinai, gave it to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men who gave assembly. And it's not an ethical lesson, I don't think. Maybe it is. It's not an ethic.
Saying it's just a history of what transpired, from one point to another.
Mm-hmm.
But be deliberate in judgment. You're talking about, just not being shades of gray, but black and white. As far as judging people, judging things that around us.
So,
prejudging.
Yeah, that's a good question. These three lessons that they taught are basically three ways to not make mistakes. How many times have you read stories in America where they killed someone, capital punishment, and years later they found the DNA evidence and they actually exonerated that person. Right? Why is that? Because in America we're very wishy-washy with our judgment. We don't take the seriousness of what it means to actually be a judge and be in charge of deciding, of making important decisions in other people's lives. If you read the Torah sections that talk about how careful a judge has to be to not make mistakes, you read it today, it's shocking. It's shocking. How many different ordinances are in place to try to prevent errors? How many crazy things we'll do to make sure that we won't kill someone if he does not need to be killed? How we specifically do not have a prosecutor that's trying to prosecute, irrespective of right and wrong. How we specifically are trying to find a way to get the guy off the hook so we shouldn't, God forbid, encounter a situation where we will kill someone who does not need to be killed. How the cross-examination that we give to these to the witnesses is so thorough and so so broad and dealing with so many minute details. Like the example that they give is that two people they cross-examine them separately, and they ask them a multitude of questions. And if there's any incompatibilities, we throw out their testimony. So one of the examples is that the rabbi said, I am so careful with my deliberation on capital punishment cases that I asked them. They said, you saw a murder, right? I asked the two witnesses separately. You saw a murder, really? Where was the murder? By the tree, really? What kind of tree? It was a pomegranate tree. Both said, how thick were the branches? Were they this thick or were they thicker? That was the example of the questions. It means he's thoroughly examining to not make a mistake. That's what it means to be deliberate in judgment. And I'm giving you the tip of the iceberg of how incredible and incredibly specific and how minute and how careful we are in our cases of capital punishment specifically, but even in other cases of giving punishments of any sort.
Sure, even when we can prove it was done, and we're going to take that soul and hang him or electrocute him or whatever, it might take 10 or 15, 18 years to accomplish that goal because we don't want to do the wrong thing.
Well, you're saying today in America?
Yes.
Well, I think that's actually a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think death row is a terrible thing.
Yes.
It's like you're sitting there just waiting to be wait and be fried. And in the Torah, the opposite is actually true. If someone is convicted of capital crime, right, a murder, adultery, whatever the case is, different categories of capital crime. So what we do is like this. First of all, there's three different levels of courts of law. Monetary courts of law, all you need is 3 people. Capital crime is you need 23 judges. It means it's a much bigger, much more diverse group of people to try to come up with more ideas. It's much more serious. And there's also a Sanhedrin, like you mentioned. The Sanhedrin is, it's 71 judges, and they sit in Jerusalem, and they deal with macro issues related to Jewish people. Like they're the ones who make the decision to go to war or not, etc. Now, the only way we could kill someone in a court consisting of 23 judges is if you have 13 to 10 that say he's guilty, right? And ironically, if there's 23 that say he's guilty and none of them say that he's not guilty, then he's off the hook. Why?
Is it considered a bloody court?
It's not a bloody court, but it's considered a court that didn't do its due diligence. If you're a court of law and you're 23 competent rabbis who have a broad knowledge of Torah, at least one of you should find a way to get the guy off the hook. Mm-hmm. If you have 23 to nothing, it shows that you're incompetent. Mm-hmm. And if you're incompetent, an incompetent court cannot mete out capital punishment. Wow. And let's say you have 15 to 8, let's say, right? He's guilty, right? What do they do? What do they make a vote, right? Guilty, right? You have 15 to 8. Everyone has to sleep over it. That's a preliminary vote. And then you have to think about it. You have to stay up the whole night, and all the people that said he was guilty, they have to try to find a way to get him off the hook. How careful we are in our deliberation of justice. They're not allowed to eat, right? And they have to try to find a way to get the guy off the hook. Now, if you said yesterday in the preliminary vote that the guy is not guilty, you can no longer change your mind to say that the person is guilty. As opposed to, if you said he was guilty, you can switch to say he's not guilty. Examples of how deliberate we are in judgment. That's what it means on one level.
Okay. Well, you said the vote has to be 13 to 10.
At least 13 to 10.
Oh, at least, okay. So
it means it can't be 12 to 11. Okay. It has to be more than one majority.
Okay, so can it be between 13 and 22? But it can't be 23.
Yeah, right.
So if you have 22 that say guilty and they think about it overnight and it's still 22, he's still guilty.
Yes.
But if it's 23 at the beginning, did they have to deliberate or is he automatically off the hook?
Once the guy's off the hook, he's off the hook.
So at 23, he's off the hook.
Yeah. Yes, so that's an interesting thing and interesting perspective. But I have some more questions. I want to read this slowly, the first sentence again, and let's see if we can pick out some questions. Okay, Moses received the Torah from Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders. What did Joshua do to the elders? He transmitted the Torah to the elders.
Okay. I've got a question going back to the first.
Okay.
When Moses received the Torah, he received this orally from God.
So God transmitted the Torah to Moses.
Right.
Moses to Joshua.
He didn't write it down right away.
Neither did Joshua.
Okay, so this was all transmitted orally.
Well, there's the written Torah and there's oral Torah, but that's related to Jerry's question. I think when it says Torah, it means both. Okay. When we say Torah, it means both. It means the written Torah and the oral Torah. Mm-hmm. So Moses got the written Torah, and he was dictated to him by God, and he wrote it down. And he was at the oral Torah, and he taught it over orally. But I think your question was like this. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. Moses transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua transmitted it to the elders. The elders transmitted it to the prophets. See the disconnect here? How come we don't say either Moses received the Torah from Sinai, Joshua received the Torah from Moses, elders received the Torah from Joshua. Or conversely, we could say, God gave the Torah to Moses. Moses gave the Torah to Joshua. Joshua gave the Torah to the elders. How come by Moses we say Moses received the Torah, and by everyone else we say it was transmitted?
Wow, yeah.
Because Moses still had the Torah. He transmitted it to Joshua, but he didn't give it up. He still had it. Then both he and Joshua had it. Joshua transmitted, so then both Moses, Joshua, and the elders had it, and the elders transmitted. So Moses, Joshua, the elders, and the prophets, they all still had it.
And we don't know. It was transmitted. Does the transmission mean like an email? It's broadcast. In other words, what's the definition of the word transmitted to them? How are we going to define the word transmitted?
Well,
over a loudspeaker.
We could take what the Midrash says of how they taught the Torah. Right? They taught it orally. Right? Moses took Aaron. Right? And he said he taught Aaron the Torah. And then Moses and Aaron. And then they brought in Joshua, and Moses taught it again to Aaron and Joshua. And then they brought in Aaron's kids, and then Moses taught it to Aaron, to Joshua, and to Moses' kids. And they brought in the leaders of the people, and then Moses taught it to Aaron, Joshua, Aaron's kids, the leaders of the people. And then finally they brought everyone in, and Moses taught it again. So Moses taught it like five times, and Aaron heard it all those 5 times, and Joshua heard it one, etc. Means they did do it orally, but it seems that the way Moses received the Torah is totally different than the way anyone else received the Torah. Why is that? Because Moses got it from God. Moses was the prophet, the kind of prophet that God spoke to directly, as opposed to Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, all the prophets we have in Jewish history. None of them ever had direct correspondence with God. What's known in the Hebrew vernacular is aspaklaria me'ira and aspaklaria she'ena me'ira. Right? These are the scholarly terms for the different kinds of prophecies. The way Moses was prophesied to was, Moses, do this. Moses, this is what it says. Straight, direct. As opposed to the way all other prophets were communicated to by God. It was in the form of hints. They had a vision, and they understood that if I see a bloated pot, Isaiah, and I know that's a lesson to me to teach the Jewish people. Jeremiah, we know the book of Ezekiel, just full of what he saw, right? And he interpreted what God showed him, and he pulled from that, he gleaned from that the lesson or the idea contained within that. Moses, the prophecy of Moses was totally different. It was 100% the will of God, 100% because it was communicated to him in that way. Therefore, we could say there's a tremendous difference. Means it was not up for his own interpretation. When I say something to you, or you say something to someone else, the way you perceive it and the way that person hears it and perceives it could be a little bit different. Moses received the Torah from God at Sinai. He received everything exactly the way it was meant to be. There was no ambiguity to it. There was no room for any questions. There was no room for any discussion. Absolute clarity. From Moses on, we're going to be faced with a challenge of preserving the authenticity, preserving the Torah in its purest form, because it was always transmitted. And every time there's a transmission, you always run the risk of having different people hearing different things, understanding things differently. And that's why in the whole discussion of Torah, you'll always have to make sure that you understand exactly what it's saying. And that's the challenge of writing down the Torah. Right? We know the oral Torah was oral for a reason. Why was it oral? Because when it's oral, it's much easier to prevent these mistakes from happening. It's much easier to use insinuation, to to use inflection to make sure that there are no mistakes. And you don't hear something, you don't read something and see it one way, while I read something and see it the other way.
Yeah, but it's also possible when it's oral that you don't remember it
all of it.
precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and we think that because we live in a time where everything's doodled and everything. But think about 18 hours a day for 14 years, you'll remember it. Yeah. And that's what they all did, and that was like standard.
Well, that's why when a scribe writes a Torah, he has to copy it letter from another Torah. He can't just do it from his head.
Yeah, but the schools that taught the oral Torah, that's the written Torah. And written Torah is almost no mistakes or almost no disruptions. I'm saying it's identical. All Torahs are all identical. 304,805 letters, and they're all identical, all the Torahs, because there were many things put in place, ordinances to make sure that it was it's done accurately. But with regards to the oral Torah, there's a tremendous need to make sure that it's transmitted accurately. Moses, there was no such problem. Moses received a Torah from who?
From God?
From God. Mm-hmm. What does it say in our Mishnah?
It says it received from Sinai.
Well, that's from Sinai means from the Sinai experience, right? That's what it means. But why would it say, why is it so important to remind us, that Moses got it at Sinai? We know who he got it from. That should be more important, I would think. Does that make any sense? Remember, when the authors wrote down these words almost 2,000 years ago, right? 1,800 years ago, every word was heavily calculated. Every word was weighed. There were thousands of people that edited these documents, these books. There's no way that a word was just put in there. Oh, okay, Sinai. They put it in Sinai, whatever. Oh, we could have wrote God, but we just wrote Sinai arbitrarily. It doesn't work like that. It says Sinai. There's a lesson behind it.
Yeah, your brother said last night every letter has a precise meaning.
Yeah, and it's significance. It's significance. And all there's hundreds, probably thousands of commentaries written on chapters of the Fathers. I have here. There's 3 inside here. There's 2 inside here, and there's also 2 inside here. Different books with commentaries on. This is just like literally tip of the iceberg. But everyone jumps. This is the kind of critical thinking that's able to open up the well springs of ideas.
So is the Torah just transmitted orally until they were in Babylon and when they wrote it down?
No, the Mishnah was written in Israel.
Not the Mishnah. I'm talking about the Torah itself.
No, the Torah. Moses wrote the Torah. It says in the Torah itself Moses wrote it.
But when they first wrote it into scrolls is when they were in Babylon.
Who says that?
Well, that's what I've heard.
Moses. It says in Deuteronomy. Moses wrote down these books, these scrolls. No, I think you're getting mixed up between the Talmud.
I could be.
Yeah. No, the scrolls. Moses wrote the scrolls, and it says at the end of Deuteronomy, and Moses wrote these scrolls and gave it to the Jewish people.
Did it say the period of time it took to write the entire Torah?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a disagreement as to exactly when he wrote the Torah.
Okay.
Because we know that the Sinai experience is halfway through Exodus. So everyone agrees that at the time of the Sinai experience, God dictated to Moses to write Genesis and half of Exodus. The question is, from the middle to the end of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which was the next subsequent 40 years, when was that written? Was that written all at the end of Moses' life, at the end of the 40 years? Or was written in different sections as things happened, as God gave more instruction, it was written. But everyone agrees that Moses wrote almost all the Torah. Right? The last 8 verses of the Torah are after Moses died. So there's different opinions of who wrote the last 8 words of the Torah. Some opinions say Moses wrote it prophetically. God instructed him to write it, posthumously. Others say it was Moses who wrote it. It was Joshua who wrote it. But for sure, the first 5,004. No, sorry. 5,837 verses of the Torah, all written by Moses. The last 8 verses, that's already it was a Moses or was it Joshua. But yes, that's with regards to the Torah. Recently, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, German scholar by the name of Julius Wellhausen, he came up with a theory saying, oh wait, this Torah, Bible, right? That everyone, all the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, all accept as being the word of God as dictated to Moses, right? No. And he came up with a documentary hypothesis. You know the documentary hypothesis?
See the guy with the said there was a J author and a P author.
Exactly. That's a brand new idea. It's coming from someone, by the way, who probably can't read Hebrew, right? People who don't know, who have questions. I've read some of the dissertations, right? I've read some of the questions that they've had, right? And a 5th grader who lives in Israel has to answer off the majority of their questions. The majority of the questions that they have is because they don't know anything, and it's like it's like you having an argument with someone who doesn't speak English. Different slang, American slang. You can't, you don't get anywhere with that because you know and they don't know.
And I'm not familiar with the author. What you were saying, Ed?
There's a theory that there's several authors, and they trace it back to certain things or political differences that some people lived in Israel, some people lived in Judah, the Southern Kingdom, the Northern Kingdom, and there were political differences, and the different chapters were meant to favor the politics of one area.
This is from post-Enlightenment, right? In the 19th century, when the scholars of universities were trying to distance themselves or distance the Bible, the Jewish and the Christian Bible, from being just baloney. It's all stories, it's all foibles, it's all folklore, it's all legend, it's all baloney.
Actually, I was thinking of bringing it in tonight, but I forgot because I wanted to show it to you. The magazine we get from the Reform magazine we get, which really pisses me off a lot. This is from what I read in there. But a guy wrote, and this is the Passover issue, a guy wrote a whole article on why we were never slaves in Egypt.
Yeah, and I get very riled up about this.
Was this the same issue for
it's
Jews
the last
all
issue.
over,
It's the last issue we got.
by the Jews all over the world,
Yeah,
different countries?
And I didn't read this whole article because I started reading, I got mad. So
Yeah, it's and we have tons of evidence that it's correct, and the Torah predicts things. Just think about the state of Israel. How many times in history has there been a nation dispersed from its land, and 2,000 years later, come back to their land and reinstitute a state there? How many times has it happened in history?
Never.
Once. It happened once.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? And the reason why is because when you get dispersed from your land, you disappear. The Torah predicts the Jews will be bounced out of Israel. They'll remain few in number. They'll be spread across the whole world. They'll stay a nation. They'll come back to Israel years later and rebuild a state. The Torah predicts that. The Torah predicts the Holocaust. Holocaust is not a subject that a lot of people are comfortable talking about. The Torah predicts the Holocaust. And I'll tell you something even more. And this will blow your brains out. Literally blow your brains out. Ready? Okay, it's a small crowd, so I'm willing to share it. If you were to take the Torah and count all the verses in the Torah, sentences in the Torah, the number you would come out to be would be 5,845. This is how many sentences there are in the Torah.
How many sentences?
Sentences. 5,845. Now, the Jewish calendar starts from Adam. So if you ever heard the number 5773, this is the Jewish year. The Jewish year starts from Adam, starts from the beginning of the Torah, right? and it's 5,773. Okay?
Okay.
You're like, what's the significance of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were to take every year, so this is this year, 2013 is 5,773.
773.
If you were to take a verse in the Torah and you were to put verse number 1 to be year number 1, and verse number 20 to be year number 20, and to verse number 1,000 to be year number 1,000, and to verse number 5,773 to be verse 5,773, and you were to go to 1939, the beginning of the most disastrous genocide in the history of mankind, and the most unlikely of events that have ever happened, in the most unlikely of places, in the most cultured, sophisticated country in the entire world, will systematically eliminate or try to eliminate the Jews and get them out of Europe.
Of Europe, yeah.
The Jews were living in Europe for more than 1,000 years in total, or not in total peace, but completely. The center, the epicenter of the Jewish activity was in Europe for 1,000 years, and like that, in one instant, they were destroyed, totally obliterated, and sent to the United States and to Israel. And just like in one second, poof, one area of Jewish vibrancy closes its door, Israel opens up and becomes a new center of Jewish vibrancy. If you were to take the year 1939, which corresponds to the year 5,000, how do I make a 6 backwards? 6? Is that a 6?
Oh, that's fine.
Oops, I'm doing it backwards. 5,699, right? Everyone here following with me?
Yeah.
And you were to look at the year, at the verse number 5,699, you will find that the Torah predicts the Holocaust. Not only does it predict the Holocaust, it predicts what year it's going to happen. Because the verse that says, I will violently remove you from your land with anger, with wrath, with fury, and cast you to a different land like this very day, is on verse number 5,699, which corresponds to the year 1939, which is the beginning of the Holocaust.
I'd have to go to the other building to get a copy of it.
Wow.
You said there's no...
It's in our sanctuary, which is in the other building.
Boom. What do you say about that? What do you say about that?
Phenomenal. Never heard that.
Yes. Not only does the Torah predict the Holocaust, it tells you what year it's going to happen.
What's the chapter and verse number of that?
This is in Deuteronomy. And if you get me a book, if you get me a if you get me
Well, it's
copy.
in the other building, and I don't want to unlock the other building.
Oh, it's not.
Do we have one?
Prayer book?
It would be in our prayer book.
No.
We would have it. We have. No, that's just the prayer book. That's not a Torah.
I'll find it for you. I might be able to find it.
I don't think. Let me look at
No. Did the rabbis of the time, in that year,
Yeah.
when they were reading through Deuteronomy and to that chapter, that exact, sentence?
Did they know?
Yes. Or did they have a feeling that was going to happen?
I don't know. It's I'm trying to see. Let's see if I can find it.
Do you have a Musar in Atlanta area? Anybody doing anything like that?
I'm sure. Yeah, of course. Try to figure out. I can't find it here. Somebody had this program for me. But it's towards the end of Deuteronomy. Hey, you know what you could do?
I may actually.
You know what you could do? This is the end of the Torah. Count backwards, right? 146 verses. 146 verses. 146 verses from the end of the Torah is where you'll see that. Now, lastly, I want to show you guys here something really cool. So I have my grandfather, if you heard of him, Rabbi Wolbe, he was a great Musar leader and master, probably the most influential in the post-World War II yeshiva world. And one of his students said, what is this?
It's the Torah in a year. I've got it. It's got a download because I got it in the cloud. It's downloaded.
So one of his students wanted to figure out, hey, wait a minute, the transmission of the Torah, let's see if I can figure out how many years it's been since, or how many different links in the chain.
You can probably find it.
Oh. Well, where is this?
I don't know.
Day.
That just goes by day, so that's like.
Oh, so you want to learn the Torah in the day. So should you fast forward all the way to the end? And just.
What is that? That's the entire Torah on your phone?
Yeah, it says the Torah, and I downloaded it. It says the Torah in a year, so I don't know. Yeah. So it should be there. I'm not sure if it just gives the weekly parshat or.
Yeah, this is at the beginning of Leviticus right now. And then you get to the end of. No, you can't.
I should be able to.
It's in a parsha called, I think, Nitzavim.
Let me go to the beginning.
It's in the beginning of Nitzavim.
Here we go. Cover, table of contents, beginning, table of content. Oh, not available in this title. No table of contents there. Okay, well, this has 6,345 locations, and if we do the math, let's see. 56.
You know, it's there. I can email you if you want.
The Torah is only in Houston.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
And my daughter was saying she went to the rabbi that married my daughter in Atlanta. Went to yeshiva, went to school with Rabbi Brahms. It was just a coincidence.
Oh, wow. Take a look at this document. Take a look at the last one.
Oh,
You see this last line?
your brother showed this last night.
Yeah.
What is this? Which one?
So this is a teacher-student list.
Shlomo Wolbe. That's your
Yes,
father?
that's my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
Yes, from means teacher to student directly from top left. God at Sinai, Moses, Joshua, Pinchas, Elish, Samuel, David. Obviously, King David. We know. Achia, Elijah, right? Prophet Elijah. You've heard these names. Elisha. You go further down. You see Isaiah. All these famous names. Jeremiah at the further down. You'll see, and it will all with the dates that they died. And you'll see teacher, student, all the way from God at Sinai.
I think the one your brother had last night had his name at the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Your brother?
That's nice. And if you take a look, let's say, at this commentary that I have over here, you see Rashi. Rashi's on the list here. Rashi is, boom. He died 1105.
I see that.
You see that? That's Rashi. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we have his commentary. And we have and each one of these rabbi-student relationships is documented by at least 4 sources. At least 4 sources that show, this was the rabbi of this person, and this was his students, this was the disciples. Each one of these connections means from modern times, from today, 2005, from my grandfather, all the way back to 1300 before the Common Era, the Sinai experience, Moses, direct, unbroken link. You know, and you'll take a look at the Mishnah that you have in front of you, and take a look at the first name. Take a look at the second Mishnah. Shimon HaTzadik was Shimon the righteous. Where's he?
That's just 310.
310. Very good. Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon the righteous. And the next one is Antidnos Ish Soko. Antidnos of Soko. What's the one right after that? It's the next Mishnah. It's the next.
Oh yeah, it sure is.
And he's the next one on the list.
Yeah, Yossi ben Yezreel.
And he's the fourth. He's the fourth one.
Yeah, I see my name here, Yehuda.
How do you like that? Huh?
Yeah.
See this commentary, Ruach Chaim, which means the spirit of life, was written by Rabbi Chaim Volozhin. Here's your man, Rabbi Chaim Volozhin. See, we have commentaries right here on the table with us right now of at least two people, that are on this list. See, it's already 8:54. Taking mad overtime. But I'm having a great time. But I think that yes, sure.
Some are listed as, of course, as rabbi. Some are listed as Rav.
Very, very good thing that you noted.
Yeah.
And the reason why that is so, some of them.
Then you have, of course,
Here.
Rav.
There's something called smicha. The term smicha, have you heard the term?
Yes, ordination.
Ordination. But it comes from there's modern day smicha, and then there is historical smicha. There's the historical smicha, which was that you could only give smicha to someone else. You can only ordinate someone as a rabbi if you received smicha from a rabbi, someone who received from Moses.
Okay.
That stopped, right? And the Romans stopped it. And you take a look at stories. You take a look at Sanhedrin 14, or 13 or 14. There's a story about one guy who tried to do it, and the Romans came and they killed him. They stopped it. Around this point, they stopped smicha. This point in history. So, from here on, you'll see only Ravs, which is not rabbi. And even prior to that, it was only given in Israel. So half the Jews live in Israel, half the Jews are living in Babylon, right? Out east, only the ones in Israel had the title rabbi.
And then you come down to the bottom and you start seeing rabbi.
Well, rabbi, but remember, that's the modern smicha. It's modern, it's not the same thing. So I always have smicha. And I'm also a rabbi, but that doesn't mean that it's the same. It's the same rabbi. I didn't get it from somebody else, from someone, got from Moses. That was stopped.
If you have a business card, would it say rabbi? Or
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Rabbi, yeah. But that's because the modern term rabbi doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Okay.
But in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, you'll always notice that the people who lived in Israel up to a certain point were called rabbi, and the people who lived in Babylon are called Rav.
Okay.
That's an interesting thing that you pointed out. I actually wanted to
Mar before Rav.
there's some people called Mar. That's remember at that point, people were living. You take a look at those years. It was the 7th, 8th, 9th century, were times where people were living in Babylon, in Iraq primarily, and obviously they adopted some names and styles of names, and one of the styles was called Mar, or like means master, but some of them were called Mar Rav, etc. Just like the rabbis in Germany were called Hachaver, means like the friend.
Oh, really?
The Sephardic rabbis called Chacham, the wise man. It's just every different culture and society has their own little kinks. But I wanted to answer one thing that this will end. One thing that I think is important, and that was the question of. There were so many things that we left unanswered, like why does it say sign and not God, and etc. But I want to just say this point, and that is that why over here specifically is it necessary to tell us the transmission or the order of transmission? Why specifically at the introduction of the Book of Ethics is it so important to tell us this is a part of the Torah? The Torah was given from God to Moses, Moses to Joshua, etc. We said there's 63 books, and only one of them has this preamble. How come specifically over here is it necessary to give us the preamble? God gave the Torah to Moses, etc. So I was thinking that specifically in a book that deals with ethics, it's important to say that this comes from God. And what God considers to be ethical is ethical. And ethics cannot be up to the determination of a certain society. The Romans, they said if a child was born with any imperfection of any sort, it's ethical to drop the child into a well and kill them. That's the most ethical thing to do. Not only that, as recently as Hitler said that in one of his books, right, he wrote, and one of the laws that they passed in 1937 was that if a child is born with any imperfection at all, if the child has a cleft lip, you have to kill them, and that's ethical. And we view that as not ethical, and we view what the Romans did. They thought, hey, if you shoplift the belt from JCPenney, it's ethical to kill you. And we say it's not. So what is it really? Is it just up to the whims of society? Whatever direction the wind blows, whatever the lobbyists in Washington tell us is ethical, and what's, and other, is adultery ethical? It's interesting that in today's society, adultery is kind of fine, but murder is not. While in past societies, the opposite was true. Adultery was absolutely out of the question. Murder, not so bad. Book of Ethics. Ethics are immutable. Ethics cannot be up to the determination of man to decide what's right and what's wrong.
Morality comes from God.
Morality comes from God, exactly. And the second you make ethics and morality something that's up to society to determine what's ethical, what's not, what do you get? Jews are pigs, right? What do you get? You get, dare I say, but you get that abortion is woman's right. Now, abortion is not as, in Jewish law, is not as clear-cut as life begins at conception. I don't want to get into that discussion. But 50 years ago, abortion was totally, totally taboo. Nowadays, if you just open your mouth once and say, hey, maybe the child is alive. Hey, I hear a heartbeat. You say, whoa, my own body, right? You get, and what's ethical? What's not ethical? There has to be something which is a moral compass. The compass doesn't change.
Well, same thing in the gay communities.
Absolutely the same.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Means I study every week with a psychiatrist. I said, show me the DSM-3. The DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the book that describes psychiatric disorders. And up to the DSM-3, it had homosexuality as sexual deviant, which deviance that was treated, and that's as recently as 1983. So then it was considered a psychiatric disorder. Now it's totally normal, right? And we're totally championing it. So yeah, it's up. Is morality just?
Well, nowadays, if you say you believe marriage is between a man and a woman, you're a hater.
You're a hater.
Yeah. So I think specifically, if you want to have real ethics, you have to know that there's a compass. And just like a compass, the north doesn't change. And you can't say, oh, I want north to be that direction. North is north. Yeah. Right? We call it a moral compass because just like a compass, it has fixed it has fixed qualities. In a book that starts with ethics, we tell you that this is part of the Torah. And it was given to us by God. and that makes it moral. Our morals come from God, and that's what makes it. What God considers moral is moral. What God considers immoral is immoral, irrespective of what your society says. And interestingly, society has come around pretty much to the Jewish opinion on a lot of things. Value of human life is one example. We were screaming value of human life for years on top of our lunch mountaintops, and no one was listening to us. And just the past 300 years, humanism, right? As if it's a brand new thing. We've been saying it in the Mishnah, right? Every man is like a whole world. You kill a man as if you destroy a whole world. We've been saying it way, way before that, when it was totally out of the moral sphere of society. We were saying it, and it's still around now. And nothing that we stand for today is different than what we stood for 2,000 years ago, or in 2,000 years from now. Because if it's from God, if it's part of this line of tradition from God to Moses, Moses to Joshua, it's immutable.
The thing that you make me think now was God gave the Torah to Moses.
Yes.
And when some of these, quote, Christian friends, God never gave them a book. I just happened to be thinking about that as you were speaking about God giving something to something. Just a comment.
It's true.
Well, they adopted our book.
Yeah.
And then added on to it.
No, and then abrogated it. And said, oh, you don't need to do anything besides for just accept Jesus as your...
When's a rabbi on TV preaching? There's two of them.
This what?
Rabbis preaching Christianity.
Well, so what makes him a rabbi?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's my thing. You know what? This is what I can understand. I was speaking to a conservative rabbi, and I said, how could you be a rabbi? I wasn't telling him this. This is what I was thinking. How could you say that, how could you teach Torah on one hand and teach the wisdom and the ethics of Judaism on one hand? On the other hand, you say, Torah, well, it wasn't really Moses who wrote it. There was redactors. There's the J and there's the E and there's the right and there's the V and the L and the D, right? How could you on one hand consider yourself a rabbi, on the other hand say, Judaism, Torah, tradition, it's all baloney. To me, it's the same thing as a rabbi getting up there and espousing Christianity. Yeah. It's not, you're not a rabbi then, right? If you're a rabbi, it means, your allegiance is to the Jews.
The Jews, yeah.
That's my thing. Yeah. So you just say, hey, listen, I don't want to be Jewish or whatever. I don't want to affiliate, and because I don't believe the Torah is true. But don't say, I'm Jewish, I'm a rabbi, and I teach Torah on one hand, while on the other hand saying, it's not real. It's not real by God. It's all, Jews never went to Egypt, right? It's all baloney. It's all fairy tales. It's all fairy tales. Go become an accountant. Mm-hmm. That's my point. Anyhow, it was a great pleasure. I'm sorry I went over time.
Sorry we didn't have a greater crowd here.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I was able to go off.
We'll send out more emails next week.
I wish